Chapter 9. A surprising letter starts me on a new life. I looked from one face to another but couldn't get a word out, and I warn't the only one who had tensed up waiting to hear what happened next. Boys stopped eating and fidgeting, and it felt like all of us was trapped in a balloon that was ready to burst. "A letter?" Mr. Beetle sputtered. "I will indeed see this letter. Hand it over at once." "Oh, yes, sir, I'm glad you're taking a look, for it's sure to answer all your questions," said the man. "I'd be happy to read it to you, sir, for the handwriting's hard to figure in parts." "I can read it just fine," glowered Mr. Beetle. He took the page out of the man's hand and began to read it aloud. "Dear Sir, my husband, James Barry, and I have heard that a 10-year-old boy named Billy Creekmore is in your care. We believe this boy is the son of my sister, who died shortly after he was born. Only recently have we learned of his existence. His father, also named Billy Creekmore, wrote us when my sister died and said their son was stillborn. Last month, however, I heard news that leads me to believe that he wasn't telling the truth and that the boy is alive. I was tending the bed of a sick woman in a mining camp not far from our town when I heard the story of an unusual boy near 10 years of age named Billy Creekmore. The teller of the tale, a healing woman like myself, claims she delivered the boy at midnight on Friday the 13th, 1895. The boy's father abandoned him shortly thereafter. She took care of the child for a while, then left him at the Guardian Angel's Home for Boys, an orphanage run by her cousin and her husband. Knowing that the name and age of this boy matched that of our nephew, should he indeed be alive, my husband has come to see him. If the boy no longer resides with you, we appreciate any help you might offer in determining his whereabouts. If he does, we thank you heartily for caring for him up to now. We are his only living relatives and wish to raise him as our son. Sincerely yours, Mrs. James Barry." "Are you Mr. James Barry?" thundered Mr. Beetle, to which the man answered yes, he certainly was. "And do you have a birth certificate, a baptism record? I need documentation, my good man. It's the only way to determine if you have claim to this boy." "No, sir," said the man sadly. "We didn't know he existed. How could we have such things? I can tell you, though, that he has the same sort of chin as my wife and her sister and the same blue eyes with black lashes, and he's the right age with the name of the man we know to be his father." "Sir, this is not good enough at all. Until you can prove you are indeed his next of kin, I am his legal guardian. I have arranged for him to be apprenticed to the glassworks factory in Morganton." "The glassworks?" gasped the man. "Surely you wouldn't send him to a life as miserable as that." "It has been arranged. The boy is going to the glassworks." "But, sir," pleaded the man, "I'm telling you, sir, as I look on him now, I know he is my wife's one and only nephew. If only she were here beside me, you could see for yourself. And if the likeness is not enough for you, sir, could you please find it in your heart to let go the matter of a baptism record or birth certificate? All we want is to offer the boy a home." All of a sudden, Peggy stepped forward. She was heaving with crying, tears streaming down her face. "Why don't any of you ask Billy what he wants? Surely his voice counts for something." Mr. Beetle was too shocked by her insolence to say anything. He stood there with his mouth open, glaring at all of us. I took advantage of his silence to say my piece, my head tingling as if I was making up the biggest lie I could, only this time it was the truth. "Please, Mr. Beetle, I want to go live with my uncle." Mr. Beetle fumed with anger. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a little gold magnifying glass. He held it up to one eye and looked over the letter here and there for what for exactly I couldn't say. I imagined he was double-checking the part that mentioned his wife's cousin, the healing woman, for surely that was something he couldn't ignore. The letter must have looked sound enough, for he gave it back with nothing more than a sigh. Paper was paper, and he wasn't up to fighting it, especially since he spent so much time lying about things like birth certificates and letters. So he had to let me go with the man I came to call my Uncle Jim. Well, I was near bursting with questions, such as if he knew where my father might be and what my mother was like, but things got all in a rush and I had to be patient. Uncle Jim waited in the kitchen with Peggy while I gathered my belongings and said goodbye to my friends. I had been delivered from the glassworks by an uncle I never knew I had. Inside, I tossed between soaring happiness and feeling stunned by the strangeness of it all. It was easy enough to get my things since I had packed them all in the flour sack days before, but it was harder than I thought to say goodbye. I never thought I'd have to do it, since my plan was to sneak away while everyone was sleeping. "So off you go, eh, Billy? Will you ever think of us?" asked Walter Barnes. I could hear the jealousy in his voice, and I knew it weren't any kind of question I could answer without making him even angrier than he already was. "Of course I will. I'll even write you from time to time." "Sure you will," said Walter with a smirk. He didn't believe me, and I felt guilty knowing that I probably wouldn't write Walter or anyone except maybe Peggy and Rufus. "I'll write you," said Rufus. "You know how good I am at writin'." His face was so earnest and shiny and made my heart sad. "Write me soon as you can with your address so I can write you back." "I will," I said to him, turning away before he could see my eyes tearing up. I carried my tin box and my bundle of clothes and met up with my uncle. Peggy's voice was happy and bright, for she learned he was from Wales, which is just across the sea from where she was born. She smiled and shook his hand again, telling him that she loved me like her own little brother. "Be a good boy and mind your uncle. I can tell he's a kind man. Where's your home, sir? How far do you and Billy have to go?" "We live in Holly Glen, miss, 20 miles southeast of Charleston. Not so very far, but the mountains here in West Virginia make every journey a long one. We'll take the train there, for it's too far and rugged for our old mule to travel." "The train! How exciting for you, Billy! What a glorious thing! Oh, be happy, Billy, for you're with family now, and there's an adventure before you as well." And with that she scooped me up for one last hug in her great arms. She cried a little, and I did too, for I knew that Peggy was always and forever my true friend, the likes of which I might never find again. And so I turned my back on Guardian Angel's Home for Boys, walking the same way I'd planned for my escape, only now I was leaving with an uncle I didn't know I had, and with a home waiting for me in a faraway town. Bare branches reached across the narrow road to each other. The ragged Cheat River tumbled below without a threat to be heard. It was the first time I remember feeling steady in the world, even though I was walking with a man I barely knew to a faraway place I didn't know. The words seemed to be whispering goodbye to me. The woods seemed to be whispering goodbye to me. "Goodbye," I said back to him, and if Uncle Jim thought it was strange, he didn't say so.